What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and this video I want to do something a little bit different for the channel, but keep it within the theme of looking back, right? So, look, we talk a lot about remasters, remakes. We're in that era, right, of gaming, but vanilla versions, the originals, and preserving their life as well, right? I do think is very, very important. I have been collecting more and more and more games, and obviously I collect the remasters and remakes as well, I guess, but obviously I like to collect a lot of just original games, and I think there's still an audience out there that is into it. Now, I will admit, because I don't want to come across completely tone deaf, I do not think it is a massively substantial number. You know, it could be a few thousand people, maybe a couple tens of thousands of people, depending on the game that you're talking about. So what are we talking about here? Well, I have the Nemesis picture behind me here because this involves Capcom and Resident Evil. So this is an article or kind of a snippet, I think, of an interview that started to blow up a few days ago, and I just wanted to kind of weigh in on it. So this is GOG, and they say GOG does pride itself on playing a slightly different role to its friendly rivals. Unlike some of the other companies, it often doesn't work with the original source code of games. It's also less focused on remastering titles for a modern audience and instead likes to re-deliver the original experience. A year ago, GOG released the original RE 1, 2, and 3 on its platform, and I mean the original ones, not the remakes or the HD remasters, but the games as they were, albeit with a few technical tweaks. I was one of the people that spearheaded this project, who was GOG's senior business development manager, Marcin. I don't know how to say the last name, so we'll just skip it. Capcom were like, we have all of those remakes. It's already the superior experience to those games. They didn't really see the value in bringing back the vanilla versions. It took a lot of convincing that there is an audience that has a lot of memories about those games and would love to experience exactly the same game again. Thankfully, we were able to convince them. And I think I saw a real Radic on Twitter talking about, even if you go back a couple of years ago, Jim Ryan talking about Gran Turismo and just this, I call it out of touch. Now, people did kind of respond to me where it's like, well, you know, how out of touch are they when it's such a small group? And again, that's why I don't want to come across as tone deaf, like maybe it's the most important thing. I think it's important to us. So I kind of can see both sides to it, but we've had, like, okay, so you have Capcom, like, just flat out rejecting their original games, right? Jim Ryan, I believe, talked about Gran Turismo 1 and 2. I think his quote was something along the lines of, like, why would anyone want to play those games? And it's like, ooh, that stings. That stings. But again, in some way, definitely, I think it comes across as very tone deaf. Resident Evil, this one's even more interesting, specifically because of 3, right? Like, you can argue the remaster remake thing that they did for 1. Obviously, like, RE2 remake is one of the greatest and kind of a earlier age remake, right? Like, obviously there's been remakes for a long time, but it's often looked at as one of, if not the best. But then RE3, like, you know, maybe from like a visual perspective and stuff like that, but in terms of what they cut, and it's like half of what RE3 actually is. So I think you could make a really good argument there that just makes no sense, right? That there actually is legitimate value to the original Resident Evil 3, right? That's kind of the point I'm making. At least that. Now, I'm sure you can make your arguments for 2. I'm sure you can make your arguments for 1, but specifically 3, it comes across very bad, you know, that Capcom is willing to say those things. And I guess, you know, it's a he said, she said, like, this person is saying that's what if it blew up big enough, maybe Capcom comes out and says, oh, well, we never said that. They could be lying. They could be telling the truth. But could you believe a company would say that? Absolutely. The Jim Ryan thing, who was literally one of the top guys, obviously, right, had a huge role in PlayStation, really hurt PlayStation in my personal belief, but whatever. These people at the highest points of these companies, like, I think some of them legitimately, you know, believe this. And look, is there value to remasters and remakes? There are. And I will defend them more than I think the average man, you know, to be honest with you. I see a lot of people online, at least in my little bubble, that actually criticize even the concept of doing remasters and remakes. And I can understand it, and I can also understand it from, like, this perspective as well. I would just say, like, let them live. Let both live. You know, I think remasters and remakes are important. They really can jumpstart things. We've seen that dozens of times where, like Crash Bandicoot, let's say, one of my favorite franchises of all time, the very first game I ever played was Crash Bash, okay? I have a deep, deep love for Crash, always have, always will. So when they bring back Crash for the Insane Trilogy, like, at the time, that's just a revival project. That's just to really test the waters to see if people still love Crash. And I think it goes on to sell like 20 plus million units. Like, it was so unbelievably successful and popular. And it was, and here's the thing. Actually, Crash is a good example. Crash is one of those games that I actually can do both. Like, I still think about the original vanilla version because that's what I grew up on. I grew up playing Crash Team Racing, when I was 5 years old, every day, or as much as I can remember every day. And when I see Wrath of Cortex and things of Crash, when I picture it in my head, I see the original. Does that make sense? I visually see me playing it, the original PlayStation 1, right? With those visual graphics. I can play the Insane Trilogy, and it can bring me back. But I think there's actually something very, very special to those old games. Now, I do not have the same kind of connection to Resident Evil as I have for Crash, but hopefully that, it's just a little thing that I can actually connect to. I think it is important, and I think thinking about Crash for me is how I can see it to other people. I do think vanilla versions are incredibly important because it takes you back, and sometimes the vanilla version can be better. Even Crash, like the Insane Trilogy, they tweak some stuff. They change some of the difficulty type, like some of the spacing of like when you're doing a jump and shadows, and like they actually tweaked it where you might actually prefer the original, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And you could say that about anything, any remaster or remake that's ever happened. I think you'll always have some people, right? Not everybody, but you'll have some people that maybe defend the original or say the original is still better. Heck, we're seeing it. What about Final Fantasy VII, right? What they're doing to the story. I actually like it. I'm actually on the defending Final Fantasy VII side. But you have a lot of people that are not into it, and what do? They go back and play the 1997 classic of Final Fantasy VII. There's something very powerful and meaningful in these original games. It's the games we grew up on. If they ever remade or remastered, well, they did remaster, like Sly Cooper, right? Sly Cooper actually did get the PS3 remaster back in the day. I played that thing so many freaking times, but I also played the original Sly 1, 2, 3 so many times. So it's like I can do both. I can kind of respect both, but I also believe you need to allow the originals to not just exist, right? Because I guess technically they all exist, but I would like to see some sort of preservation done for those as well. I think that might be the weakness, and that might be the negative that people kind of talk about when we do the remasters and remakes. I think from a company perspective, we are really dropping the original from our memory, where there is no original. This is now, I mean, you hear it all the time, like this is the definitive version of the game. And here's the thing, I think maybe like 7 out of 10 times that is accurate. I think when somebody remasters or remakes a game, is the new one legitimately the best place to play it and the one you would recommend to a new person to play? Yeah, I think it is most times, but not all the time. And even most times you could still do the original. Dead Space is another example. Dead Space got the remake. They gave Isaac a voice. He didn't speak in Dead Space 1. It changed it actually quite fundamentally, and it made it, I think, extremely good. But I think there's a ton of value in the 2008 Dead Space along with the 2023 version. The point is we can have both. Doesn't mean you should drop Dead Space 2008 entirely, right? We should still find ways to keep that game going. Now, I think we have, for some of these examples I'm giving you, but, I think that's just kind of the mentality of the industry is when they do these remasters, remakes, they drop and they just pretend like the original isn't there anymore because now this is that definitive experience, which I get to a degree, but you are robbing people in that way. You're robbing people of what started it, of their childhood memories, which are nostalgia is very powerful, and it can lead to money, by the way. So if you can find ways to keep these vanilla versions alive, again, though, this is where I would think business-wise, I do get you kind of have to balance it with like how many people actually care, because how many people are forcefully fighting for, let's say, Resident Evil 2's vanilla version to like be preserved for the end of time. and I pick Resident Evil 2 specifically because the remake is so good in a lot of people's minds, right? RE3, you can make the argument, no, we got to find a way to preserve that original because it still is probably better than 3 remake, right? 1 is 1, but 2 I think I picked on purpose. So you could argue, like, okay, is there 20,000 people that care? Is there a million? Is there 2,000? Like, you know what I mean? Well, I don't actually know, but, you know, as a business, they kind of would need to know, because if you're preserving it or you're doing whatever, it's going to cost you money one way or another, and then you need to make that money. But, you know, it's all a business, and that's kind of the sad part of it. But I hope it's an interesting conversation for you guys. Let me know what you think. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel. We'll have another retrospective next week, and I'll see you guys there.